Hello and welcome back, guys. We are here for round 3 with the list that you see on screen. As I mentioned in the previous video, unfortunately there were some audio issues with the original recording of this one, so I'm going to have to do a play-by-play sort of replay where I talk over the game as it went, sort of. You'll see exactly how that works out, and if you like this style of video, I have done it in the past, leave a like and comment on this video. Let me know. Maybe I should do all my videos like this in the future. I have no clue. So whatever you guys prefer. I definitely feel like there's a little less dead time in these style of videos. And I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But of course, assuming that there's no feedback from this video, I'm just going to go back to what I normally do and do the live gameplays for match 4 and 5 of this league, as they are generally my preference. But let me know in the comments what you guys want to see in the future. Regardless, we just went through match 2, currently 2-0 with the list that you see. And if you're interested in this deck list, go check out match 1. But let's just jump straight into the replay for game 3. Alright, so we are here for game 3. We are playing against Craig 642. And we are on the play again. Why wouldn't we be on the play again? I don't know. I will never complain about being on the play. And we are greeted with the following hand. We have a turn 3 Dryad. We do have both a white and green source to cast our Eladamri's Call. And in fact, if we top deck a basic force or something like that, we can play turn 1 Crossroads, turn 2 Call here, and set up a Titan that way without having to spend any downtime on our Eladamri's Call. So it's kind of close, but I think that this hand is a fine keep, especially on the play. Being able to play a Dryad on turn 3 with access to Titan, it's probably good enough. So we keep this. And we lead off on Kabir Crossroads, of course, getting the tap land out of our hand, and also we can pick this one up to our bounce land to gain a little bit more life. Our opponent fetches for Stomping Ground, which is interesting. My first inclination here was Dredge, believe it or not, as Dredge would play both Arid Mesa and Stomping Ground. But then we see a Noble Hierarch, and that indicates that things are going to be a little bit different here. The last deck that I knew of that played Stomping Ground and Noble Hierarch specifically would have been red-green Eldrazi. Like, next turn they would drop an Eldrazi Temple and Thought-Knot CRS or something like that, but haven't seen that deck in a while, so we top deck a green source, but it's not an untapped one, so I mean, that said, we could still just play it out and keep our bounce land in hand in case we draw an Amulet. So we're not going to be able to call this turn, but I do think playing out the Garenbrig is going to be the play. And we pass it back. Our opponent has a Fetch Shock, once again, doing all the damage to themselves. And they play Knight of the Reliquary. Now that one is a curious one to see. Wasn't really expecting this. So this is obviously some sort of Naya Zoo deck. We don't know whether they're going more aggressive or more late game, though. Knight of the Reliquary suggests that they're going more late game, but we'll see. Regardless, it's not really going to change our play. We're going to play out our untapped source. Going to slam this Dryad on turn 3 here. And we're going to get this Sanctuary out of the way. Of course, we can play our Ghost Quarter here and have Titan mana this upcoming turn, or just play a Golos. So, whatever happens, happens. If we Golos into Valakut and then play Telarios as a land off, then we can get a Valakut trigger out of our Dryad this upcoming turn. So, and they Ghost Quarter our Sanctuary, which is a shame. We'll get a green source here for activating Castle Garenbrig, potentially. But that one definitely hurts. They play a second Knight of the Reliquary and pass it back to us. We top deck a Garenbrig, and we play it out. And we play out our Ghost Quarter, and I assume we're just playing a Golos here, which we do. And here we can get Bojuka Bog to shrink our opponent's Knight of the Reliquaries, and so that will be the play. And so, boom, that graveyard is gone. We sent our opponent back to the Stone Age with their 3-mana 2/2s. We are going to get in with the Dryad here because there's no point in losing our Dryad to a Bolt by blocking. And we can just call for and play a Titan this upcoming turn if we top deck any untapped source. So we're looking pretty good here. Wild Nacatl. Okay, that's an interesting one because this signifies that our opponent is going to be lower to the ground and more of an aggro deck than a, bigger, like, mid-rangey type strategy. So it's definitely a good little clue to get in game 1 here. Our opponent's just playing out all their creatures. We top deck Azusa. It's not quite going to let us cast Titan this turn. So instead, we choose to transmute for, I believe, Valakut. Yep. And we play our Valakut, intending to kill a Knight of the Reliquary. I think this was a misplay, though. Should have gone after the Nikotl or the Scavenging Ooze. The reason being, for exactly what we're going to see right now, our opponent is going to be able to activate double Knight of the Reliquary and counter our Valakut trigger, forcing us to, of course, once we realize it, Ghost Quarter ourselves to get a Valakut trigger that can kill this Knight of the Reliquary. But, I mean, it's better than getting no value off of our Valakut this turn, and getting a threat out of play just seems like it makes the most sense. So, our opponent is able to bump their Knight up to a 6/6 with Wooded Foothills, but that is about it. There's nothing they can do here to save their Knight. And they're going to use their green mana that they floated peculiarly to hit our lands from our graveyard. It's most likely that they put us on some sort of Titan Vial or green-white Reclaimer deck that can Eladamri's call for Ramanop Excavator or something like that. So that is why they choose to go after our lands here. Our opponent cycles some lands, puts a Rallier into play to draw some more cards with their Horizon Canopy in the future, and none of this is going to matter because we're just going to end of turn Eladamri's call for a Titan. We know that they don't have Path to Exile since they have no cards in hand, and they're not going to have the mana to draw into and play a Path if they crack their Canopy, so we are good to go here. We're just going to activate Garenbrig, and we actually have the haste here as well with the Hanru Battlements, so we just kind of have it all here. So, all of our opponent's positioning didn't really end up making a huge difference here. We get Field the Dead and the Valakut field so that we can play our Battlements and get some blockers if they do have the Path for a Dryad some crazy way, but it doesn't matter. Our opponent is just dead. And that is the game. And, in fact, they fetch and tap their Horizon Canopy to do the last couple points of damage to themselves. Anyways, I will see you guys for the sideboarding. Alright guys, so we are here for the sideboarding, and I have the deck configured the way that it was for games, well, for Game 2 here. There were some changes for Game 3, and we'll go over that once we get there. But this is the decision that was made for Game 2. We sided out these 8 cards that were in our main deck that are now in the sideboard, and we brought in these 8 cards here. So, firstly, we're trimming on some of our tutor effects like Eladamri's Call and Summoner's Pact. The reason being that one Titan is oftentimes good enough to win the game on its own. If we have a Titan that resolves with a Dryad in play, then Field the Dead plus Valakut is going to do a pretty good job by itself, even if we don't have Tolaria West to line up a second Titan of just running over our opponent anyways. So the likelihood is that as long as we can get access to a single Primeval Titan, we're not going to need another one. So there's no reason to have a bunch of additional Pact-type effects or tutors here. We also are trimming on Karn, the Great Creator, because obviously our opponent is keeping very close to the board, well able to clock our Karn, the Great Creator, and stop us from getting any additional value out of it. So instead of paying 4 mana to get a Wormcoil out of the sideboard, it would be much better to just naturally draw the Wormcoil and play it on 6. No reason to do any shenanigans with Karn. And also, if we side out the Karns and bring in the explosives, it gives us an additional tutor target for our Tolaria West if it need be. So we also are boarding out 1 copy of Azusa in order to have a higher density of blockers, as Dryad and Grazer are much better at blocking our opponent's creatures than Azusa, as Azusa will just die. I mean, of course, Azusa being able to get several land drops into play before it dies anyways is still relevant, but regardless, that's the reason for siding out an Azusa. And then finally, we side out the Cavernous Souls, as just in the previous match, the Cavernous Souls in this case is just a overglorified forest. And in fact, it's worse because if our opponent is playing Blood Moon or Magus in the Moon, then it doesn't play around those things, whereas an actual forest would. So we're siding that one out, obviously. And the cards that we bring in are as follows. We bring in a Relic of Progenitus to play around our opponent's Knight of the Reliquary, give us an extra out to shrinking it without having to search for a Bejuga Bog. We bring in Engineered Explosives against their Nikotls and Tarmogoyfs and stuff that they're most likely playing. Of course, Explosives is going to be great here. We bring in a couple of paths to deal with their big and important creatures, as we're not really afraid of 1-mana 3/3s and the like. There are certain creatures that we'll need to be able to get rid of, like Knight of the Reliquary or Magus of the Moon if they happen to have it, or whatever, and throwing a single path could be the difference between winning and losing in the matchup, so we do bring in Path to Exile. We also bring in the 2 heavy hitters from the sideboard that we would usually be searching for with Karn, because we did side Karn out. Of course, that's going to be Wormcoil Engine with the 6/6 lifelinking Death Touch body. Mainly just being a 6/6 lifelinker is going to be fantastic. And Sky Sovereign, of course, being able to come into play, pick down a creature, and then from that point on, if we are able to crew it, continue to work on our opponent's board while also working on their life total. Obviously, we want access to these effects. So that is how the sideboarding went for Game 2 here. And I will say, a little bit of a spoiler, there was a massive mistake in this sideboarding, and I'll see if you guys can guess it, but I'm not going to tell you ahead of time, so you'll have to see for yourself what occurred in the game, and we'll discuss it then. Alright, so we are here for Game 2, and our opponent's on the play, of course. We had taken down a match 1 in pretty impressive fashion, I might say, and we are greeted with the following hand. Triple Bounce Land, turn 1 Arboreal Grazer, Engineered Explosives to interact, and turn Timber Symbiosis to give us an untapped source if we need it, or to just go and hopefully find a Primeval Titan. So it gives us something to ramp to, it gives us our payoff. We have a Grazer to block, as well as ramp us, and Explosives to deal with our opponent's board and buy some more time that way. So obviously this hand's going to be a snap keep. Our opponent kept 7, and they lead on turn 1, Stomping Ground, Shocked, and a Wild Nacatl. So we see the famous 1-mana 3/3 coming in. I happen to really like this card, actually. It's not the most powerful card in Modern, but Wild Nacatl is a cool one. In fact, you will have seen it as the thumbnail of this video. So, regardless, we, of course, deploy our Grazer on 1 here off of our Crumbling Vestige. No reason to take 3 damage from our turn Timber Symbiosis. In fact, it's not even clear that we want this Symbiosis to be in play. It might be better on our hand at this point, so we're going to go ahead and throw in our Grazer, and we put out Tolari West instead of one of these bounce lands to give us a way to play around our opponent's potential land destruction. If we put in a Selesnya Sanctuary here and got Cleansing Wildfired, that would be pretty disastrous, so we're trying to play around that. If we do top deck a Dryad or an Azusa, we can shock in the turn Timber Symbiosis as our 3-mana play, and put in a couple bounce lands and get ahead of a type of land destruction effect. So that is the idea behind that. We pass it back. Our opponent fetching for basic planes, which is curious if you ask me. Of course, this bumps their Nacatl up to a 3/3 so they can clock through our Grazer. But here we're just going to go ahead and cash in our Grazer for a Lightning Bolt equivalent. No reason to hold on to it. It's not like it can profitably block Nacatl in the future or anything like that, and it already did its job in ramping us. Might as well just get it out of here, especially since if our opponent deploys a couple more 1-drops here, like a, I don't know, say a Loam Lion or a Curd Ape or something like that, or both, who knows, then we'll have the freedom to play Explosives on 1 and blow it up by shocking in or bolting in our turn Timber Symbiosis land. So that's the idea behind that. Our opponent slams a Goifo and passes it back, and expertly we top second Arboreal Grazer. Like I said, this is one of my favorite cards in this whole deck. I think it's vastly better than Scout, and it's not even close in my opinion. And here we're actually going to go ahead and take 3 life just to get this Grazer in play. If our opponent can't increase their Tarmogoyf clock, then this will gain us 2 life, and then more life in the future. And it also gets us a land ahead, letting us, again, accelerate past our opponent's Cleansing Wildfires by getting some additional land drops in play. We get to pick up Crumbling Vestige as an untapped source if we, well, as a untapped source, quote-unquote, if we want to. And we do. And here we just pass it back. No need to deploy Explosives on 1 here, as we can just play it on 1 and blow it up anyways, so that would just expose it to Destructive Rivalry or a Wear and Tear or something crazy like that. So we're just going to wait on that one. Just going to chill on it. Our opponent swings out with a team after playing a Seal of Fire, and of course, their ploy here is that they can pop Seal of Fire and put an enchantment in the graveyard and bump their Goyf up to a 3/4 so that they can attack through our Grazer. Here, there's no sense in letting them keep a Seal of Fire around. We might as well force them to use it. It is curious that they have Seal of Fire in the first place. That might symbolize that they play Lurrus. I don't know. We'll see if that becomes relevant later in the match. Of course, we do pop off the block, force them to use the seal, give them no other option, get their shock out of it, because our Grazer is going to gain us our 3 life either way. And they're going to fetch, shock, and play another 2-drop, which our Engineered Explosives happens to like very much, I must say. So we're going to untap. And there's a cool trick here with Thalia. Thalia does not actually tax your Engineered Explosives at all. So what you can do is you can pay X and then add 1 to the cost. So, like, say you want to play Engineered Explosives on 2, like in this case. You can play it for X equals 1, tapping a green for it, and then pay the Thalia tax with the blue, and it'll still come into play with 2 charge counters on it because 2 colors were used to cast it, regardless of the fact that not both of those were paying towards the X. So, here, we're going to play out our explosives on 2. Play a bounce land here, picking up our Turn Timber Symbiosis so that we can accelerate into this one at some point in time in the future. And we're going to pass it back. No reason to pop it now. I suppose we could be playing into a potential Boros Charm or something crazy like that, where our opponent could take advantage of the fact that we didn't pop our explosives to give their creatures indestructible, but nobody plays Boros Charm, so not even going to worry about it. We let them go to combat, and we're going to go ahead and pop off this explosives because we're not going to take damage from these guys just to keep a Thalia out of play if they have a redundant copy in their hand or something crazy like that. So, not worried about it. Go to 9. They Ghost Quarter us, sadly, and so we're forced to search for a basic. And we go for the planes here because if our opponent happens to have a Blood Moon effect, then we can use our planes to Path to Exile, say a Magus of the Moon, or whatnot. And we have a Windswept Heath to fetch a basic forest here as well during our upcoming turn, so we can actually play around Blood Moon pretty effectively. So we're going to deploy our Arboreal Grazer here. We're going to pick up the planes, play our Windswept Heath so that we can fetch in the case of a Blood Moon, and pass it back to our opponent. We'll, again, go ahead and just take our 3 life, not get greedy with our Grazer, and our opponent just passes back with 3 mana up, which is curious. Can you think of any 3 mana card that our opponent could be playing in their creature deck at instant speed? Because I definitely can. We don't even bother fetching here. And now we fetch during our main phase, and our opponent just lets it go. I don't know. We play our Turn Timber Symbiosis here, and of course we hit Primeval Titan. What else would you hit with a Turn Timber Symbiosis? And they fire off a path. So we'll search for a basic land, and then we'll search for 2 lands with our Primeval Titan. We choose to go with Field of the Dead and Simic Growth Chamber. The reason being we can trigger Field and get some zombie tokens here in order to play around our opponent being able to kill us with an attack and some damage. And the Growth Chamber is going to let us pick up the Tolaria West, so we can play Crumbling Vestige and float a blue and be able to still transmute this upcoming turn. But if we didn't have Crumbling Vestige, we could still get Growth Chamber to pick up a bounce land, like the Sanctuary. We could float with our Growth Chamber and Tolaria West, and then play the bounce land and pick up the Tolaria West. So even if we didn't have Vestige, we could still use Simic Growth Chamber here in order to have access to a Titan transmute this upcoming turn. And yeah. I don't know what is going on here, because there's more to this game. I'll hit the play button. What is going on? I don't know why Magic Online doesn't have the rest of this game, because our opponent actually did not concede here, if I'm not mistaken. Odd. So, what happened here is we picked up our Tolaria West, planning to transmute it next turn. Our opponent deployed some sort of threat with their Wild Nacatl, and they attacked, and we double blocked, and they might have killed one of our zombies, or just traded with the Nacatl. I don't really remember at this point. But we picked up our Tolaria West and went to transmute the next turn for a Summoner's Pact. And if you remember correctly, both Summoner's Pacts are in the sideboard. So instead of finding a Summoner's Pact, we are forced to find another land. In fact, I believe it was the Vesuva that's currently showing in our hand right now, so I don't really know what's going on, but we transmuted for Vesuva to copy our Field of the Dead, since that was the next best thing that we could do. And Or, I don't know, it might have been Kabir Crossroads. Maybe we did have the Vesuva in hand, whatever. It doesn't matter. Regardless, from that point on, we continued to top deck blanks, just lands. Our opponent Ghost Quarters our Field the Dead before we get a chance to Vesuva it during their upcoming turn, and they run into threats, and we run into nothing. No anything. No Titans, no Karns, and we actually end up losing this game after such a good setup, specifically because we didn't have the Summoners Pact to transmute for it with our Talaria West. So we ended up making that game-losing sideboarding error that I don't know if anybody would have anticipated. From this setup, it looks pretty impossible to lose if you do have a Summoners Pact, but regardless, this causes us to go for a game 3, and I am sorry that you cannot see the rest of this game. It's just been a nightmare, I guess, for the last 2 matches. So regardless, we'll make a swift sideboard change for game 3 here, and we'll be on our way to the races for the hopeful win in this match. I will see you guys there. Okay, so I'm here to show you the changes that were made between game 2 and game 3, and they're pretty simple. We lost because we didn't have access to a Summoner's Pact to transmute for, and that's not unheard of for our opponent to have a Path to Exile for our Titan and us need to have a backup. So what we do here is we side out the 2 Relic of Progenitus, as we have seen Wild Nycoddles and the like, and they do have Tarmogoyf, but they're able to restock their graveyard pretty quick with burn spells and things like Seal of Fire and whatnot. So we'd rather not spend our time messing around with Relic of Progenitus, and instead we bring in the Summoner's Pact, just one, and I believe the Azusa here, just to make sure we can accelerate our land drops. Like I said, Azusa can block. It's not fantastic in this matchup, but it's not the worst. So anyways, I'll see you guys for game 3. All right, so we are here, and we are on the play, which is fantastic. Love to be on the play for a game 3 here. Even if we maybe shouldn't have gotten to a game 3, but that's fine. We see an opening hand of 1 bounce land and several regular lands, including a Kabir Crossroads, Amulet, and Primeval Titan. And this hand is questionable, to say the least. If we had any sort of ramp, like a Dryad or a Grazer or a Garenbrig even, perhaps, or an Azusa, Summoner's Pact, all those cards would fantastically speed this hand up to be on par with what our opponent is doing. However, there's a strong possibility that our opponent will have removal for our Amulet, and that we'll just draw more lands because our deck is half lands, as you might recall. So there's definitely a likelihood that we don't top deck any of those cards that we need. And being on the play, I think we can afford to mulligan towards something a little more progressive. So we do mulligan that hand, and we are greeted with the following hand. It's a very interesting one. We would sorely like to see a bounce land, as is frequently the case in Amulet. In fact, that's why it's generally preferred to play at least 8, if not more, 9 or 10 bounce lands. I like playing as many bounce lands as I can afford, but I think 8 is about my minimum. I've gone as low as 7, but I definitely prefer 8 bounce lands. We would like to see a bounce land off the top. Of course, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll know that via hypergeometric distribution calculator, even in the first 3 draws, we're less than 50% to draw a bounce land. That said, we could draw regular land into Garenbrig as well, and that would allow us to cast a Titan on schedule. We do have a Dryad, which means that we can set up Valcut. If we didn't have Dryad, but just had like double Azusa or something as well, this hand could be somewhat questionable. I'd probably still keep it, though. And yeah, so we do decide to keep. And the card that we put on the bottom here is the Azusa, of course, because we don't have the lands to work with Azusa anyways. If we draw a bounce land, we can just Dryad into bounce land and get our acceleration going that way. No need for Azusa in this case. Dryad also blocks better, so. And we're going to lead off on our Windswept Heath and Pass, leaving ourselves the option to fetch for basic Plains and Path, but it's unlikely that's going to happen on turn 1. And of course, our opponent plays a tapped shock land on turn 1 anyway, so gives us no opportunity to Path. And we haven't seen any evidence that our opponent is playing Blood Moon. They did make that sketch fetch for a basic Plains earlier, but other than that, they just have a mana base full of shock lands, and they weren't fetching very aggressively for basics in the last game, from what I could tell. Other than that one odd fetch for the Plains, maybe it was just to make an attack with an Nycoddle. Maybe they had a shock land in their hand or something, and they wanted to get the thinning. I don't know. That was a weird play, but I still don't really put them on Blood Moon, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up a Temple Garden here. And since we already have a basic forest in hand, we can play our Windswept Teeth and go fetch for a basic plains if we really want to play around Blood Moon. So, of course, we put our Windswept Teeth directly onto the battlefield. Our opponent is fetching for basics yet again. They play a Voice of Resurgence. And, yeah, that's a Voice of Resurgence. We don't really care about that, in all honesty. We can even just block it all day long with a Dryad, so... We play out our basic land and fetch for another basic land to fully set us up against Blood Moon here. Slam our Dryad onto the table, play our additional land drop, and pass it back. If we draw a Garenbrig or a untapped source, then we have Titan this upcoming turn, thanks to Summoner's Pact plus 6 lands, or 6 mana, I guess I should say. Yeah. So our opponent plays a fetch land and passes. We draw Field of the Dead, and can't cast Titan this turn, so we're just going to play the Field of the Dead and our Ghost Quarter, and hold up Path to Exile, and our opponent has a lot to do here. Even if they were to play something really crazy, we could Path and just accept that we're giving them a Voice of Resurgence token on their turn, and then untap and Titan them, so... Yep, we pass it back. They're going to fetch Shock and cast the 3-mana card that you might have been thinking of earlier, Aven Mind Sensor. This one's going to make us only able to search our top 4 cards of our library instead of our whole deck when it comes to things like them Ghost Quartering us or our Summoner's Pact or whatnot. So here, if we wanted to be absolutely as conservative as possible, we could Summoner's Pact in response to the Mind Sensor so we can set up our Titan and make for certain we have access to it. Just tap out this upcoming turn and, take a turn off. It's clear that we're not under a whole lot of pressure anyways, but we've got a path to deal with this one, and I predict our opponent will feel secure if they have a Mind Sensor in play. They'll feel like they can fade Titan draw steps, for example, so I decided to let this go, planning to path it on their instep. They can take the voice token if they want. No big deal. They swing out. We consider blocking with Dryad for a moment, but to be honest, resolving Titan with our Dryad in play is most likely to be lethal off double Valakut Ghost Quarter ourselves anyways, so there's really no reason to lose our Dryad to a Bolt just so that we don't give them a token from our path on their instep, so we just take the 4 like champs. Complete disregard for our opponent here. Not respecting their damage strategy at all. And they tap out for a Knight of the Reliquary, which is just absolutely the best possible news. So we just show them we have the path. Throw it off on this Aven Mind Sensor. We untap. Draw a bounce land. Lol. Summoner's Pact for Primeval Titan. Put that guy into play. Search for double Valakut. Well, that's what we would be searching for, but our opponent doesn't need to let themselves see it. They know the writing on the wall. We could even just mow their board and attack them with Dryad, and it's whatever. We can basically not lose from here. We're also triggering Field of the Dead, so... Anyways, that was the match. Almost could have lost based on the lack of Summoner's Pact in our deck in Game 2, so it's definitely worth noting that in an Amulet shell, you should not side out all of your Summoner's Pacts. Always leave one if you can afford to. And yeah, that's all I can say about that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, it's not really my preference to do these play-by-play videos recapping what happened in a match, and I apologize for that. We'll be playing live matches in the future. That is, unless you say in the comments that you prefer this style of video and you'd like to see the rest of the match done like this. I can do that. Regardless, let me know what you think. If you like my content, if you support my channel, then show your support by leaving a like, comment, subscribing, all that good stuff. We're here for the knowledge and for the entertainment, and if you are able to get any of those out of my videos, then it helps me and it helps you. Go ahead and subscribe, all that good stuff. I'm not going to say it again. I'm not going to waste your time any more than that. This is Redface Menace, signing off.